From the KSL Broadcast House, this is Sunday Edition with Doug Wright.
And good morning and welcome to Sunday Edition. This is week 2 of the Utah legislative session. It's done now, and lawmakers are making major headway on some of this year's most controversial legislation. This week, the Utah lawmakers passed a substitute bill to ban transgender surgeries and limit puberty blockers for minors. That bill is now on its way to the governor's desk for his signature. House lawmakers also passed a joint resolution that would make it easier to challenge the hold on Utah's abortion ban. We'll talk with Utah Representative Brian King about these issues. And plus, how would a tax cut really affect Utah families? But first, another bill that is headed to Governor Cox's desk is the school vouchers bill. It's other things too, but that's how it's known on Capitol Hill, which would give a teacher pay increase and also money to students in home study or in private schools. The governor has already said that he will not veto that bill. As a matter of fact, he said it's a very balanced approach on this. And we're very pleased to have with us our special guest, and we did invite, by the way, the sponsor, Candace Perucci, to join us, to be here today, but because of scheduling conflicts, she was not able to make it. But I am joined by the Utah Education Association President, Renee Pinkney. Renee, your reaction to this so far, and the governor did say a very balanced approach, in your opinion, and your organization's opinion, and teachers who seemed, at least up on Capitol Hill, not to be wild about this. Is this a very balanced approach?
Well, first of all, thank you for having me. And the Utah Education Association is devastated by this bill. I would say it is not balanced. As an association, we have had a resolution basically opposing vouchers since 1971. And we were really asking for the two issues, a teacher salary increase and vouchers, to be separated so that they could be debated and voted on their own merits, and that just didn't happen.
What is the greatest concern? And am I correct that the Utah State Board of Education also was opposed to this?
Yes, all of the public education stakeholders were unified in our opposition.
What is the primary concern on that? Because teachers are getting a fairly nice little package that goes along with this, and the fact that they would oppose the bill when they are getting a raise in this bill makes it interesting.
Well, and we were being asked as the Utah Education Association to basically compromise our values for our own self-interest, and we opted not to do that. So the issue is that we have many funding needs in our public schools. And when you take $42 million, whether it's new money or not, and you are taking it out of the general fund or even the income tax fund for private schools or homeschooling, that $42 million could be going into public schools.
When you hear the presentations of the proponents of vouchers and those who argue its case on Capitol Hill, it's always billed as, well, this just gives people a choice, and it takes money that is going to their child's education and merely steering it over here. Is that an accurate portrayal?
Well, we, all educators, we want all of our students to be successful. And we know that our students have individual needs. They want to take particular classes, especially in secondary level, junior highs and high schools. And if we had a fully funded public education system, we would be able to meet all of those needs, but we've never been given a chance.
So when someone chooses to go to a private school or a charter school, whatever it might be, that money is just transferred with that child to that institution?
Well, in this case, this particular bill, HB 215.
It's more like scholarships, isn't it?
Well, they call it scholarships. We call them vouchers.
Yeah.
But they are granted $8,000 a year, and that is not quite double what the WPU is, meaning the weighted per pupil unit for kids in public schools. And that is really hard for us to understand or even accept that public money is going into private schools.
Is the greatest fear, is it the idea that this is the camel's nose in the tent thing?
Yes, absolutely. And during summation, Representative Perucci said this is just the beginning. And so that is something that we're very concerned about, because once you open that door, then we are very concerned that public education will continue to have scarce funding taken away from public schools.
Here in the state of Utah, in other states, there is much more when it comes to private education. You think of the Catholic school system and different things like that, which is much, much more prominent everywhere else in the country than it is here in the state of Utah. That puts a greater burden on the taxpayers of the state of Utah. And it creates an interesting challenge. Utah has many interesting challenges.
Yes.
Because of our, back when I was a kid, everybody called it our peculiarities, charming though they may be.
Yes.
So if we were to go down that road, realizing that we don't have really a lot of private schools in the state compared to others, where would this ultimately take us, and what would be the effect? I heard you when you came in, you were talking with another guest of ours, and you said, you know, we're here to play the long game. What is the long game if the voucher idea or the scholarship idea continues?
Well, you know, and it's not that we are opposed to private schools per se, or homeschooling.
They can
even
actually help a state in a big way.
They can, but we are concerned about who is funding those schools. And when you have vouchers, or, you know, sometimes they call them tax credits, something like that, you are in essence taking that public money out of the bank account, if you will, for public schools. And so moving down the road, what we can see happening is that our public schools will continue to be underfunded, although our legislature has indicated that they fully support public schools, and they are interested and dedicated to increasing or growing our funding for public schools. But you only have so many tax dollars. And so if it's going into private and public, private grows, well, you know, we have a balanced budget amendment.
Right. We have just a second. It appears, at least at this point, that the governor will sign this. What could happen? What do you hope will happen? And not just have a second.
Well, we are exploring every opportunity and option that we have at our disposal. And so we aren't really sure yet, but we have a lot of supporters out there, and we're looking forward to doing whatever we can.
Renee, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
President of the UEA here in the state. When we come back, Representative Brian King will sit down with me, and we'll talk about some of the issues up on Capitol Hill. Stay with us. Welcome back. This week, the Utah House passed two bills that were up for consideration that have caused some controversy, to say the least. The first, a resolution targeting abortion law, and the other, a substitute bill for transgender medical treatments and procedures for minors. That bill now awaits the governor's signature. And joining us on the program today, I'm so pleased to have Representative Brian King. And Representative King, maybe you could walk us through. We have a resolution, we have other things. So what are we actually dealing with these two issues?
Well, on the resolution dealing with changing the rules of civil procedure under the Utah Code, what we're dealing with is making it easier for the legislature to basically step in and dictate what the result of a proceeding is in the judiciary in terms of the ability of the parties to get preliminary injunctions and temporary restraining orders.
Now, this is targeted right at the trigger law.
There's no doubt about that.
There's no doubt about it. And boy, if there's anything that I've learned, and certainly you and I have talked about over the years, there is the law of unintended consequences. And boy, you take care of this problem that's bugging you right now, but what is that going to bring down the road? Are those factors being fully considered, and how real are they on Capitol Hill? If we do this to solve that, what floodgates might it open?
Well, it's a good point, and that is one of the things that we should be reluctant to do as a legislature is inject ourselves into one piece of litigation because we're changing the statute in terms of the standard for when you can get a preliminary injunction and a temporary restraining order, not just for that case, it's going to apply to everything. And the change that we're talking about is to bring it into conformity with federal code, the federal civil rules of civil procedure for getting a preliminary injunction and temporary restraining order. And it's a funny thing to me that my Republican colleagues are all in favor of that. We want to line ourselves up with the federal system when so often, of course, we look at the federal government and say we want to have nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
But in terms of answering your question, what I think I worry about is that it could very well make it easier for the legislature to inject themselves into questions such as redistricting and whether there should be a preliminary injunction entered for that. Questions about whether there should be a preliminary injunction relating to these trans bills that just passed. So it's blurring the lines. It's a turf war to some extent between the legislature and the judiciary, and it's the legislature flexing its muscles.
That's one of the real reasons I'd really hope that you could join us today, because not only do you come with a lot of legislative experience, you have a legal background as well. So I was very interested in your opinion on that, and we could talk about that issue alone till the end of our segment. But we do have this other one. I watched some of the testimony on Utah's Capitol Hill from those who were testifying before the committee regarding some of these transgender issues. And boy, it's a tough thing. I look at some of these kids and my heart just breaks for them at so many different levels. And what is happening on Capitol Hill? What difference is this going to make in a transgender child's life? And again, what are some of the ramifications of this? Where is it taking us?
Well, this is an area that's really tough all the way around because the science and medicine that are associated with this aren't definitive. We don't know exactly when puberty blockers are going to cause problems, if they're prescribed. We don't know what kind of procedures should be prescribed under what circumstances. I mean, we're to some extent trying to figure out things that are just unknowable. But we believe at the Utah State Legislature in parental control, except when we want to control parents.
Yeah, that's true.
And one of the things that I felt strongly about, and the reason that I voted no on the bill was, I think the people in the best position to make decisions about this are the parents and the children involved, along with their health care providers, their doctors. You have children that are distraught about where they're at in terms of their orientation, and they have been brought to the brink of suicide. They've been brought to self-harm. What do you do in that situation? Other times it's not as dramatic. It's not as problematic for the children involved. Well, who's in the best position to sort that out as opposed to the legislature imposing a one-size-fits-all, nothing can happen before age 18? I think it's the parents. I think it's the children involved. I think it's their health care providers. And we do believe in parental control, as we should, except, again, we want to control parents and their children.
That's right. Is the legislature, I'm just going to ask you straight up, in your opinion, with all of your experience now in the legislature and with the law, is this legislature, especially this year, and we've seen it in the past as well, rushing in basically where angels fear to tread?
Totally. I mean, this is an area where we really don't have enough information to make definitive judgments about a whole range of things. Does that mean we should say you can't have anything happen until the child reaches age 18? I don't think that's the best approach. I think we should be deferring to parents. I think we should be deferring to psychiatrists and psychologists, mental health providers. I think we should be deferring to family practitioners who deal with the children and what puberty blockers do and what kind of other procedures may be available and what they should be doing to treat the child. Because some children, you may say, you know what? That the consensus that develops on a case-by-case basis, child-by-child basis, may be to wait. Yeah. We need to wait. And that's great. That's fine. Other times, you may have a child in crisis, you may have parents in crisis, and you may find we need to take some action now. Let's do it on a case-by-case basis.
I might be getting old, but I'm not too old to remember how weird it is just to grow up, to be a teenager,
yes,
and to go through junior high and high school. And I cannot even imagine how difficult this must be for the individual, him or herself or themselves, and for the parents and the loved ones. So
that's right. And it doesn't help to have hard and fast rules that are black and whiting the whole issue from the legislature.
Well, here's a real black and white question. Do you believe that the governor is just going to let this go and move on? Will this be signed into law? And unfortunately, I need a quick answer. I'm out of time.
And unfortunately, I think it will. I think the governor has learned that if he really shows some spine to the legislature, if they feel strongly about it, will just go right over him and overrule his veto.
Representative King, what a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you for all the years we've had these great conversations. And when we come back, I'll be sitting down with Voices for Utah Children to weigh in on a proposed historic tax cut. So stay with us. Utah lawmakers are considering a historic tax cut this legislative session. Governor Cox has proposed a roughly $1 billion tax cut relief program. And while we all like to be able to pay less in taxes, will a third year of massive tax cuts here in our state actually directly benefit Utah families? And here to talk about the high price of lower taxes, Matthew Weinstein is with us from Voices for Utah Children. You recently appeared before the KSL editorial board, along with other concerned citizens and advocates. And it was mentioned in that meeting that really where we are right now in relation to what Utahns make, we're almost at historic lows, at least in the last 50 years, on what we actually pay in taxes.
Right. The data from the Tax Commission show that our tax level peaked at about 11% of personal income about 40 years ago. Since then, we've been cutting about $100 million a year on average for the last almost 40 years. So that now adds up to about $4 billion a year that we don't have available to put into the schools, infrastructure, the Great Salt Lake, air quality, disability services, all these various unmet needs. And, you know, we all like having more in our pockets today, but it raises that question of, well, what are we giving up and what could we be doing with those resources if we didn't have tax cuts?
I wonder if we just went out on the sidewalk, and obviously it's Sunday morning right now, but on a regular day and said, you know, are you paying higher taxes than you've paid here in the state of Utah in the past? And I think a lot of people would say yes. But you look at what Governor Huntsman's cuts were, what other cuts have recently been, it is not insubstantial. Now, what kind of an effect is this going to have on an average Utah family checkbook? That's an archaic term nowadays.
Sure. Well, and mostly I think what people are seeing recently as far as tax increases are on the property tax side. And that's actually in part because of the income tax cuts. You have to remember the income tax and the property tax are the two main sources of education funding. And so when we cut the income tax the way we've done in recent years, that puts more pressure on the local property tax. It makes it harder for the local officials to say no when property taxes float up with, you know, property values. So I think that's part of what people are getting hit with. Now, what's being proposed this year is another income tax cut. And the way that would work, if we cut from, we're now at 4.85% to 4.75%, it would take about $200 million a year out of the education system. It would give an average middle-class family of four about $100.
Yeah.
But they would lose over $400 because if you take that $200 million, divide it by the number of kids, they have 2 kids, they'd gain $100, they'd lose over $400 that's now not going to be invested in their kids, in the education system.
How does all of this shake out? Because for years and years, especially 10 years ago, there were all kinds of polls. Would you rather have a tax cut, or do you want our teachers to make more? Or do you want more money to go into some social services? You'd like money to go into helping the homeless, whatever it might be. Overwhelmingly, Utahns always said, put it into our schools especially.
And that's still the case. The polls, every poll that's been done, we've done polling on this. Deseret News, Hinckley Institute, Envision Utah, Utah Foundation have all done polls on this in recent years. They found that not only are people saying, don't cut my taxes anymore, they've even said they're willing to pay more For example, Envision Utah is recommending an extra $500 million a year to raise teacher pay so that we don't have such high attrition rates as we have now, some of the highest in the country. Most teachers quit in the first 7 years. That would cost money to raise teacher pay, but it's needed. You know, we found that actually Utah teachers are making less, actually pre-pandemic, they were making less than 50 years earlier. Yeah. And now the legislature just this past week passed a $200 million increase, $6,000 in compensation for teachers. That doesn't even cover the inflation we've seen the last 2 years, not to mention that they were already behind where they were 50 years earlier. Right. We've got a long way to go with all this.
Matthew, before we just flat run out of time, and I wish we had more time to talk about this, since you're basically here today representing Utah's children, a voice for Utah's children, right? What will be the effect of the latest tax cut, and what are the cumulative effects? Where can we directly see it with our kids and the well-being?
Well, certainly in our education system, we are the second lowest in the country in what we invest. And that doesn't just impact the inputs, it also impacts the outcomes. For example, if you look at high school graduation rates, you find that every racial and ethnic group in Utah is either at or below national averages for their high school graduation rate. We actually have larger majority-minority gaps in high school graduation, larger gaps between haves and have-nots than the national averages. We also see it now at the college level, where Utah, one of our greatest strengths historically was that we had a higher rate of our population with college degrees than nationally. And that's true for the older generations. But we've been losing our lead in every successive generation. And when you look at the millennial generation today, age 25 to 34, we've fallen behind. They haven't kept up with the gains nationally. And that really raises concerns about whether Utah is going to have the kind of economic future that we want to have if we don't make the upfront investments today that we've, fallen behind on.
We have about 30 seconds left, and I'm throwing a tough one in your lap. But there are other just heart-tugging issues, like taking care of our kids, their health, their well-being, making sure that they're fed and clothed properly, and not traipsing through the snow right now without adequate clothing. Very quickly, is this going to affect that?
Well, we've got a whole list. If you go to investinutahsfuture.org, click on the unmet needs list, it adds up to over $5 billion of unmet needs, which is billions more than the supposed surplus revenue that the legislature has available. I encourage everyone to look at that list and decide for yourself. Would you rather address these needs or have a small tax cut?
Matthew, thank you so much for joining today.
Thanks so much for having me, Doug.
On Sunday Edition. And thank you all for being part of the program today. We hope you'll join us again next week. And music and the spoken word, that's coming up next.